I think that a lot of people think, oh, art is for artists, and I'm not an artist, so I can't be creative. But that's what separates us from animals. So I know that we all have the ability to be creative, and we just have to believe in ourselves and then be supported in some way, by others or by our own practice, to know that, yes, we do create things all the time, and, we just have to believe it.
You're listening to The Creative Imposter, episode 30. Welcome to The Creative Imposter. I'm Andrea Klunder, and I have a huge confession to make. Today's interview is with Chicago-based interdisciplinary artist Sara Zalek. Sara is an incredible artist whose work is mostly concentrated in performance, though it also includes sculpture, video, music, and really anything else she can get her hands into. She is particularly influenced by Butoh, an enigmatic practice from Japan that came about in the late 1950s as a response to the war and as a form of rebellion against the government and the status quo. I'll include some links in the show notes so you can learn more about Butoh at thecreativeimposter.com/030. Or if you're in Chicago or want to come to Chicago, you can just experience it for yourself, as Sara is bringing some incredible Butoh-inspired dancers from all around the world together in one place in the month of April 2017 for Butoh Chicago's third Post-Butoh Festival called Battles. More on that later. Right now, here is my confession. I actually interviewed Sara over a year ago and then never published it. Why? Well, here's what happened. I got really excited about podcasting and interviewed all these awesome women for the show early on, thinking that somehow I was going to publish weekly episodes consistently. And then at a certain point, I had a handful of brilliant raw interviews sitting on my hard drive and fell completely behind on editing. So they just sat there. By the time they came up in my editing queue, so many months had passed that I felt like a total jerk. Not because the information isn't relevant anymore, but because my ego got a huge case of the imposter fits every time I thought about reaching out to Sara and the other long-lost interviewees to say that I was finally releasing their episodes. Then, a few weeks ago, by some miracle, I received an email from Sara about the upcoming festival with a suggestion that perhaps now was the right time to release that episode. Perfect timing. And she was gracious enough to get back online with me and share some updates and insights from the past year and how Butoh directly relates to the particular times in which we find ourselves right now. So, we have our first ever before and after, where are they now, double interview. Before we get into it, I'd like to give one more shout out to Lauren Ramsey of Betsy Bash Social Media to thank her for a wonderful season of sponsorship, and to Audible.com for their continued support of The Creative Imposter. If you love listening to podcasts, you probably love listening to audiobooks, and Audible is pretty much the biggest directory and easiest way to get them right on your phone or tablet or computer. You can get your first 2 audiobooks for free when you visit audibletrial.com/The Creative Imposter. That's Creative Imposter with an OR at the end, not an ER. Or make it easy and link from the show notes. In fact, I need a recommendation for what to listen to next. Start your free trial and then post in the Creative Imposter Facebook group what you're listening to, and just maybe I will too. Also, how would you like to be a part of the Creative Imposter podcast? I want to read your name out loud on a future episode. Remember PBS pledge drives during Sesame Street when you were a kid? Or is that just me? Or maybe I'd even like to have your voice on the show. Here are 2 ways you can make that happen. 1, support the show by visiting patreon.com/Andrea Klunder and become a patron for as little as $1 per month. That's less than a cup of fancy pour-over coffee at my favorite coffee shop in Chicago. There are some very fun thank you gifts available, including live online chats, bonus episodes. Remember the toolkit episodes I used to do? This is where they'll live from now on. Mystery care packages for days when you are feeling particularly imposter-ish, And I will personally thank the first 5 patrons to sign up at any level on an upcoming episode. Number 2, tell me your best imposter story. You know, that time you took a huge risk, stepped out of your comfort zone, and felt completely out of your element, like you were in over your head. And if anyone had any sense, they would know that you were a total fraud. What happened? Did you crash and burn or rise to the occasion? How did it unfold and what did you learn? If you have an imposter story to tell, I want to hear it and maybe I want to share it. Head over to thecreativeimposter.com/contact and send me a message with a quick description of your story. If selected for the show, I'll be in touch. Okay, are you ready to hear from Sara Zalek of Butoh Chicago? You've already been waiting for over a year and you didn't even know it. Let's begin with Sara's interpretation of how Butoh can inspire inquiry into our shadow side.
Yeah, and Butoh is a hard thing to describe because it's very enigmatic as a practice and as an art form. It's always been that way. It has this way of being very, I guess, Buddhist in nature, or this kind of light and dark kind of mix. This idea that we have a shadow self, that we have this self that we tend to hide or not like, but it's about exposing that and kind of giving that space and not just saying this is a negative thing, but it is part of us and we should kind of live in it and thrive through it. And how do we kind of get the audience to come with us on that journey?
Tell me a little bit more about this idea of the shadow self. What do you mean by that?
So typically in Western thought anyways, the shadow self tends to be the kind of dark side of ourselves, right? The side that we don't tend to reveal or we think is kind of the mysterious side, or the side that is kind of like the dark, the bad, the not pretty, grotesque perhaps. So it's the idea of that we all have this. So why not be sharing in that and kind of working through that together to reveal our whole selves? Because our whole selves are not always the positive, happy, like everybody's great, everything's fine. The kind of entertainment that most performance art is, or theater. It's kind of more for entertainment, whereas Butoh was not meant to be entertainment in that way, but it was meant to kind of enlighten or cast light on the stuff that isn't pretty, the stuff that is socially difficult, personally challenging. So it wants to kind of fold that and incorporate that into this feeling of, yeah, this is our whole selves, and the life journey is full of ups and downs and dark and light, and how can we embrace that whole self and then offer it to the audience as a bit of a challenge, not so much as entertainment, but as saying, like, are you going to accept your whole self, and are you going to have memories and associations while watching this performance of your own that have this potential for transforming your way of being or thinking in the world? So I think that's a big part of Butoh too. It hopes to kind of invoke this spark of transformation, or the idea that we can be anything at any time through our creative thought process.
And in fact, I've only seen you perform live one time, and that was at the Chicagoland Shorts Festival. You were doing a performance piece along with video media and live music. How influenced or inspired by the Butoh training or the concept of Butoh was that performance piece?
That performance, I performed with a musician collaborator friend of mine, Hannah Brock, who she's been working with me with music for maybe 3 or 4 years now. And Sarah Goodman is a video artist who I've also been working with for the last year. So the three of us have been just making a lot more art together. That particular piece was definitely Butoh inspired in the movement for me, and like where I was kind of coming from. The video also that was playing in the background was a previously recorded video of myself. There was also audio that I've made to go with that piece. All of it referring kind of to this idea of a dream body, or what I might experience in dreams, like one of those dreams where you're kind of searching for self, or you recognize the symbols as you're kind of going through, or when you remember, you're like, oh, those are symbols of like me trying to understand who I am or where I'm going, or kind of my path. So in that piece, although I set structures typically in my piece, but a lot of the actual movement is improvisation.
Mm.
So I work a lot with what I'm feeling at the moment, kind of the audience interaction or what I'm hearing. Like with that piece, for sure, I was affected by what Joanna was playing, also the way the light was hitting me, how that affects my eyes, and then therefore how I'm putting kind of energy back in the world because I'm receiving this very flickering light of a lot of colors. So I feel like that's definitely affecting my movement. I have a skeleton that I work with, so definitely gestures, forms, and kind of a path, right? So like beginning to middle to end, formulated, and then let the improvisation come from that.
Yeah, I was curious how much of it was choreographed versus improvisational, because I remember watching the performance and having this awareness and knowledge that I'm an observer witnessing the performance and watching it in this space. And then also I felt very emotionally connected to it in sort of an uncomfortable way, and then also sort of an inspiring way.
Yeah, well, definitely with my work, I really dive into the visceral,
Mm-hmm.
So I am definitely trying to provoke the audience in some way first. And then I like to transform it. Like for me personally, not all Butoh artists work this way, but for me, I do try to transform it to the positive, the inspiring, the like spark of, oh, wow, so you feel really excited when the performance is over. That's definitely one of the efforts of, for me, performing, is to start off in this place of maybe trauma, maybe some uncomfortable, like what is happening, this questioning, but then try to turn it to something that's positive and creatively inspirational. For one, I think right now in our world, we need that more than anything, because I feel like that creative energy in all of us exists, but most of us don't use it or know how or believe that we have it. I think that a lot of people think, oh, art is for artists and I'm not an artist, so I can't be creative. But that's what separates us from animals. So I know that we all have the ability to be creative, and we just have to believe in ourselves and then be supported in some way by others or by our own practice to know that, yes, we do create things all the time, and we just have to believe it. And so I like to somehow through my performance, and I still haven't discovered, this is interesting because I still haven't discovered exactly how or why that's happening. I just know that through my practice and through performing, that's what does happen. And so I continue to work this way. It's a little bit experimental in that way. I don't exactly know how it's happening. I just know that it is. And if I keep going, I might gain some greater insight or understanding about how and why that is.
I hear that so strongly. What it just came to mind, and I don't know if you know anything about this, but are you familiar with the Gallery 37 program in Chicago?
Yeah.
I was just reading an article about how either part of that program or all of that program is losing funding right now from the city. And that program is a keystone of working with youth in the Chicago public school system to have an outlet for that creativity, guided by teachers and guided by mentors, and really find an outlet for that type of energy and have it be nurtured and have it be something that they can actually aspire to go on to study in college. But we need this creative expression. And yet we're living at a time when all of the funding and resources are going to math, science, technology, sports.
Mm-hmm.
And the arts are losing. It seems like the arts are always fighting this battle for funding and support.
Well, yeah, I think arts and music, especially for young people, actually changes the way their mind works. You can leap, make these leaps because we have that creative capacity, but we need to understand it. We need to learn how to use it. It's like a tool that we're born with, but then if you don't use it, then you just end up forgetting that you even have that tool. So I think the terrible loss in, public school programs is the loss of the arts, but I think it's a little bit intentional. I'm not sure, but the fact that you can just make people that will just listen, do what they're told, do the job, go to work, do the basic things, and they won't be creative thinkers. They won't be able to think out of the box in a way. And when the arts are nurtured, that naturally grows with the person. Even when I was young, I didn't think I was an artist for a long time. By the way, I did a lot of other things before I came back around to being an artist. which is why actually, and I'm sure we'll get to it, why I also do business, because I actually was in business school my first time around in college. But I didn't believe that I could be an artist, because to me, artists existed in museums and they were dead. And they were, they were these big epic things that I was obviously never going to be. So I had a big disconnect for a long time around being an artist myself. And I think I've experienced other people, since then, talking to people who have taken a long time to come around to art, have similar views or experiences from, their childhood. Like I did a lot of art actually in high school, but then when it came around to college, I was sure that that couldn't be me.
Mm-hmm.
So then, yeah, it just took quite a lot of years of doing a lot of other things. And then making art was something I did as a way to just process all the things that I was doing in the world. And then finally I said, I just have to go and learn more about this. I just want to do this as my main thing. So it took a long time to get there, but I think it was obviously that was my path for whatever reason. But I'm always like super pleased when I see, even when I went back to school at the Art Institute here in Chicago, I was 33 when I started, 32, 33. And, most of my classmates were, 19 years old. And I was amazed and excited to know that they had enough confidence and enough knowledge to just go there and figure that out early on. But of course, then many of them get out of school and they're in huge debt and they're like, oh, now what do? I can't even make money as an artist. So they have still a long path before they can find their professional niche as well. It's a lifelong journey anyways, being an artist, and maybe that's part of it for me, is kind of, I've always had the feeling that we have to keep learning no matter what. So this lifelong learning approach, which I think is really key to being an artist and maybe being successful in any career.
Yeah. So let's talk about that switch for you, or maybe it wasn't really a switch, but whether you'd call it a career switch or a career enrichment of combining this background in business and then taking a leap and going back to school in your 30s. I've heard people say, oh, well, it's too late, or I could never go back and do something different, or, it would be awkward for me to go back to school now that I'm in my 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever it is. Like I kind of chose this career path. And so this is the path that I'm on. So what did it take for you to make that decision to take a risk and go back to exploring art? What was the catalyst for that? And then what was it like to be in this position of being a slightly more mature student than some of your other colleagues? And then let's talk about the intersection between business and art. That's a lot.
Okay. I'll start with the catalyst. As soon as I graduated from business school, I knew I didn't want to go the traditional business route, which was to go into a sales job at a big company. I knew right away that that was not my way. So I did a lot of social work, actually, and then also traveling. And the two of those things combined made me just keep making all kinds of art as kind of a byproduct of these processes. Traveling, I wrote a lot, I drew a lot of pictures, I took a lot of photographs, met a lot of interesting people, of course. And then through social work, I worked at some feminist health clinics for a good 10 years of like Planned Parenthood and others. And so through that, I was dealing with a lot of people's stories, trauma. So in order to kind of ground myself from that, I would also make a lot of art. I would paint pictures and just go out in nature. And I did a lot of writing and drawing. So that kept just coming up for me as, this is really important and this is what I want to do. And more, I think I tried to do it on the DIY side, which I still do and love, because I realized I wasn't, a professional artist. I didn't have art training. I didn't have the art history so much. I just was making all this stuff and meeting all these people who were in the similar situations. Eventually, I just wanted to, make art all the time. And I tried to make my own business. I'm trying to think back here. This is what happened. It was like the late 90s and computers and the internet and all that was just starting. And I was like, oh, I could probably be a graphic designer. Like I can do this. I can arrange words on a page and images and I can make money that way. And so that could be a way to fund my art practice. And so I did that for quite a while with kind of limited success. I was supporting myself through I learned how to build websites. I learned how to do graphic design, and I moved to Portland, Oregon, and I was living there. And then I was doing, I was an art model, and I was doing this side business, and I was making art. And I just got to a point where I kind of wasn't making enough. It was just like I was barely sustaining myself. And I said, there's just got to be a better way. I have to be able to make a living, and I want to be true to myself. I want to follow this art career. I've decided that that's what I'm interested in. And so that's when I started looking at art schools, and I ended up moving to Chicago and coming to the Art Institute. And believe me, the whole first semester I was in school, I was pretty much like, I don't know if this was the right decision. There's, a lot of younger people. I didn't see very many people my age or older, but I did find some. And through, after about the first semester, the second semester, it started getting better and better because I was really engaged with the work of it. Like, I realized that being a mature student has a couple advantages. One is that you work harder than most of the other students because you're there so ready to just absorb everything. Whereas I think a lot of, I know the first time I went to school, like I was still learning how to socialize and kind of like so out there in the world that school wasn't the priority in a way. So for me, I could tell like, I'm in this is my priority. And then the people that I connected with there were either other mature students or young students who were they were ready. They were just really into making, and they were serious about their school. They were serious about making art. And I just met the people that ended up nurturing me and feeding me in the right ways. And we were searching together. I'm also a little bit rare because I'm a risk taker, right? I enjoy taking risks, and I realize a lot of people don't like that. I mean, that feels unsafe and they can shut down. But I feel like if you really want something, you just go do it. It doesn't matter how old you are. I mean, I've talked to a family friend who still takes classes at her local community college, and she's 80 years old. And she still goes to these classes, and people in the class love her. They love the fact that she's there. Her brain stays sharp and fresh because she's still learning. And so there's this like give and take, that it's a really important for the mature student, for the people that already have life experience, to be in those classrooms.
You said that you're a risk taker, and I think that comes across in the work that you create. Can you tell us a risk that you've taken that maybe didn't work out so well? What?
Oh, so many. Actually, for a long time in my studio, I just had the word failure. And this was before it kind of became, before it became kind of a buzzword. You must fail. I mean, now it's kind of popular business kind of speak, or in the culture of, yes, we must fail to keep going. But failure was something I was always interested in. I didn't understand quite why I was interested in it, but now that I've been working with this idea, I just feel, seriously, most times, even now, when I'm done with a performance, the first thing I go to was all the things that didn't go right. That's the first thing that my mind goes to. Okay, this didn't go, this didn't go, this didn't go. I used to actually be quite upset. I'd say after performing, a couple days later, I'd be like, okay, I'm not going to perform again. That was it. That was the last time. And then a year or two would go by, and I'd, kind of integrate what happened. And I'd realize, oh, well, I'm ready to try again. I'm ready to try those things that didn't work. But there's this next opportunity to try to make those things right. And so I realized that every performance for me became a learning process in itself. And then I just had to kind of switch my mindset around the idea of failure. What didn't work this time could work the next, like I could use that learning to the next time, and it could keep applying and compounding. So I didn't have to focus on what didn't go right as a negative. I could actually focus on like what didn't go right as a positive towards the next iteration. So the idea that no performance for me is ever like the finished final work. It's always just the process of my discovery. in fact, I performed this past weekend, I was in Detroit, and there was a number of things that happened. Sarah Goodman and Hannah Brock were both supposed to come, and we were going to do this performance, but a bunch of things happened that made it so we couldn't do it how we had planned. And so it ended up being quite improvisational, the performance, way more than I was comfortable with. And the next day I said, that was horrible, and I don't want that to happen again. And Sarah, my collaborator who performed with me, we had this, long talk about it, and we're still kind of working it out. It's like, okay, well, what didn't work? But the interesting thing is the audience had a very positive experience. That's another interesting thing where I have to look at what my feelings are about something, and then look at what actually happened, kind of like disconnect myself personally from it. Because the audience made all kinds of associations. They read into the work in all these ways that I couldn't have even planned for, but that came through. And that because I am now more and more comfortable with the improvisational environment, you allow things to happen, and therefore the audience is very engaged and they're very part of the experience. And maybe they see you taking that risk, and that's another thing that's like really positive, because we aren't given a lot of examples of risk taking that turn out positive.
Yes, I think typically when somebody says, oh, that sounds risky, that they're already imagining like the worst possible scenario outcome.
Yeah, and that's the thing, we can use our creative capacity to definitely make up stories about all the bad things that could happen instead of like all the good things, right? So it's this matter of like, yeah, okay, how can we associate risk with positive outcomes?
So tell me a little bit let's circle back to this idea of the intersection between art and business and marrying these two worlds. I met you through Edwin Ruiz, who is my audio engineer for these podcasts. And what he had said was that he's so impressed by how you find funding for the work that you do and your ability to not be, the quote unquote starving artist, right? Who can actually navigate the world of how to find and use resources and make the connections needed to make the work happen and make it available to public audiences. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's another amazing lifelong project for me. When I first started being an artist, that was part of it. It was like, okay, how am I going to sustain myself? How am I going to make money as an artist? Because the starving artist idea did not work for me. I was like, no, I don't want to starve. I don't want to be, living in a box, although sometimes I think I could live in a tent. It's a relentless pursuit for sure. But I think for me, the funniest thing is that when I graduated SAIC, I had a lot of debt. I did get some funding to help me go there, but I also had student loans and some credit card debt I had to take care of. So I did go work at a nonprofit for 7 years to deal with that, to pay back the loans. And also what that ended up getting me, that was my first ever 9-to-5 job. And I can't believe I stayed there for 7 years, but I did. And that actually gave me this level of professionalism that I think a lot of artists don't get to experience because they're always kind of on the fringe. They're more in this other kind of world. They never get to experience what it's like to, have regular business email communications with all different kinds of people, to have to be in that professional environment. Yeah, it's quite different. It's quite different than the art world. So I think that, first of all, gave me this great experience. Even though I never thought I could do it, I actually was like, oh, I can do it. And I actually could enjoy it and could apply my creative thinking into these other things. I started as a graphic designer there, but then was promoted to a marketing position, eventually a marketing director. So there was all these things that I learned there. And so when I was ready to quit, actually, it was when the first Butoh Festival happened in the spring of 2014. I made the leap. I just said, okay, this is it. I'm going to try to do this again with now not only my business degree background, but also the 7 years of experience, and then also my art degree. So I'm going to just try to make that leap again and try to make a business of my art. And yeah, part of that is definitely community involvement. Like, I always want to get people involved, whether it's, artists in the community through workshops and teaching, or, just audience development. Also, definitely finding funding, definitely finding the people I need to talk to help realize my dreams and my projects. I remember talking to someone in the art community who I felt had a lot more clout. And I said, how am I going to do this? I want to do this festival in a venue and I want to gather all this audience. And he was like, it can't be done. You're not going to be able to do this on your own. It just can't be done. And I remember leaving that meeting thinking, I'm going to prove him wrong. It was like he dared me.
Uh-huh.
And whenever there's a dare in my life, I say, oh yeah, you're going to dare me? Well, then I'm going to show you that I can do it. And so that was my big dare. And yeah, I'm not going to say it's an easy thing. Money is still not where I would like it to be, but it's getting closer all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I just got selected to be part of this regional dance development initiative project, which is through the New England Foundation for the Arts. They gathered 12 Chicago artists to work through some of this stuff and professionalize their own presentation, but also practices and get more funding and figure out how to do that, but also then pass that knowledge to the bigger community of dancers in Chicago and beyond. Now I can be presented more nationally, be eligible for more national funding and stuff like this. So that was huge. And also this year I'm doing the Chicago Dance Makers Forum Lab Artist, which is a huge honor, and $15,000 for the year to research and work on a project. It's the biggest amount of money I've gotten so far. So I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So how you fund your work and your life is a combination of foundational money and grants in addition to teaching. What's the combination look like of all the things that that go into supporting an artist?
Yeah. Because other people have also noticed that I seem to be good at business. Other artists have come to me. And so I've been doing this business consulting for artists. So I help them kind of do vision planning, figure out like what their next steps might be to actually realizing, a more sustainable way of earning money, and also, having the time and energy for their own practice and how they marry those. And that includes, making them more social media savvy or getting them used to writing about themselves, helping them write artistic statements, helping them build their websites. So that's part of how I make money. I also do search engine optimization for small businesses. So that's where I get some of my money. So yeah, there's a lot of different parts of that. And then of course, the marketing is definitely the strong point for me to keep going, not only on my own business like Butoh Chicago, which earns an income through teaching and through presenting other artists. Yeah, it just has people that donate regularly. We're working on like a kind of a subscription plan for people to donate. Now also making more money when I present work. So now I pretty much don't do too many free gigs. So I usually get paid for any performances I do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's like it's like a web. And I feel like for artists, that the web is really important. But for some artists too, they have to find a part-time job or a job that can be kind of their simple, I go to work these hours and I get paid for those hours. And then that gives me enough sustenance to have X amount of hours to do my art practice. For me, it's definitely kind of, I must be like some kind of a super multitasker or something. I have like a kind of a pantheon of streams, right? Of revenue streams. And I feel like everything that I do feeds my art practice. That's where I don't separate so much, because I feel like every part of my life, from, waking to sleeping, the whole thing is my art practice. So I don't kind of separate them. And that helps me actually to realize that everything has the potential for using my creative side, my creative self. Yeah, and that can feed, my bank account, but it can also feed the community, and it can also feed like the artists that I'm working with, and my performance practice.
So, as you know, the name of this podcast is The Creative Imposter. How has imposter syndrome ever come up, and how have you learned to work with that?
Actually, the imposter syndrome still happens to me, for sure. In fact, I can say pretty much anytime I perform, I'm like, I don't know what that was. It really, people enjoyed that. I don't know. I feel like if it went away, I would no longer really be an artist, actually. And I've read things too that talk about like an artist can never really get too comfortable, because if you're too comfortable, you're probably not pushing anymore. And really, then are you making art, or are you just reproducing something that now makes you comfortable? So I feel like as artists, we have to embrace, maybe in the same way like Butoh embraces like that shadow self. And maybe the imposter syndrome is kind of that shadow self as well. It's like you have to embrace it. You have to say, you know what? Yeah, we're going to have self-doubt here. What does that feel like? Let's hold on for a minute and be in that. And then, oh, actually, it passes, because someone will come up to me the next day or a week later and say, oh, that thing that you did, like that really changed like the way I was thinking about this, or, something. You find these seeds, and if you see them and not just dismiss them, but if you really see those seeds coming back to you, then you realize, oh, this imposter syndrome, this self-doubt is really just me unsure in the world, which is so like, it's all of us at any time. So what are the things that I can do to remind myself that that's just a passing feeling, and that I have to just keep going even in the face of it? So I try to make sure that, I talk to the people that are my supporters. Not that I'm always looking for just the positive feedback, because I think criticism is really important, but definitely giving myself the space and time to, nurture and feel good about those things. Write down the things that I did like, and these are the things I'd like to do again, and really, make that clear for myself, because I do realize that with any positive advancement or any step forward, there's always something in the back of your mind that's saying like, oh no, you shouldn't feel good about that or whatever. But you kind of just have to keep overcoming, I feel. Just keep overcoming. If I feel like I've pushed the envelope as far as it can go, then I feel like, well, I better try a different direction, because there's more to learn here. There's more. I keep going for the challenge.
So I have one last question for you, but before I give you that question, is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you would like to share or discuss or illuminate?
Well, just that, if you have creative ideas, creative thoughts, just go for it. And every day find some time, whether it's 10 minutes or an hour, to spend on that creative thinking, that creative process, whatever it is. If it's like writing or drawing or sending a letter, to a pen pal, making sounds into a microphone. It really, there's so many things, but I think that to make work feel like it's moving in a direction that's forward has to be cultivated a little bit every day. That's kind of my thing right now.
So that's brilliant, because that was the answer to the question that I was going to ask.
I'm honing my extrasensory perception skills.
Totally.
Yay.
Yay. What an incredible interview. But wait, there's more. Remember, this is the Where Are They Now episode. And I can tell you that where Sara is now sounds like a very good place for an artist, creator, performer, businesswoman to be. In this brief follow-up conversation, we explore why Butoh is relevant right here and now, what she means by Post-Butoh Festival, hint, she isn't a purist, and how she arrived at the theme and title, Battles. I realized when I talked to you before, what I never asked you was how you even discovered Butoh or why you connected with it and it became such a passion for you.
Well, that's such a great question. I found Butoh actually at the School of the Art Institute at SAIC. There was a teacher there, or actually an artist at the time who was teaching yoga classes there very cheaply, like $2 yoga classes. And so I started going to her yoga classes. And it turns out this was Nicole Leggett, and she also was a person that brought in international artists to study Butoh, and she was studying quite a lot with one teacher in particular, Diego Pignon, but she had learned from a lot of other people already. So she introduced me to the idea. I had never heard of it or seen it before then, or if I had, I didn't know what I was looking at. The reason it spoke to me is I had already done at that point performances on my own and also been in other people's performances where, yeah, that's what we were going for, both the aesthetic, very kind of minimalist aesthetic, but also searching deep within the self in this poetic way, using image as a very strong departure point as well. And just that searching that immediately just hit me like, oh, I'm interested in what these people are teaching, like how to cultivate that to get better at that. Because I even knew even then, like I was still very much a beginner in terms of my performance style. Still wasn't very experienced at being on stage and having that power of being before an audience. And so I just became interested. And then it was a combination of the community of people that I met through taking those classes and those relationships that were formed and the teaching and what I was learning. I was getting a lot out of it and I was able to apply it immediately to my own art.
And I think to your point, in any art form or community, there's always the purists and then the people who want to advance the art form and see it evolve with new times and new input and new experience. I personally perform a style of music coming out of India and Hindu culture called kirtan, which takes, ancient mantras and sets them to music. And then we perform it in a call and response collaborative style with the audience. So the audience becomes participants. And there's the purists who are like, oh, you're taking a sacred mantra and giving it a reggae beat. That's not, that's not cool. And then there's the people who are like, well, no, this is a form of expression that came out of a certain time period and came out of a certain culture in a certain era and then has room to breathe and grow and expand. What do you see as being new or particularly important or relevant in this current political or economic or social time? Where do you see Butoh fitting into our current climate?
Well, what's interesting to me is I just was at an event a friend of mine hosted where she had kirtan music. And then once it was happening, I was like, oh, and I had an experience that I didn't know was called kirtan music, but pretty much was that only a couple weeks before with another artist. And then I said, oh, that's it. Like the light was going on, like this is something. And I loved it. Of course, I loved that experiential way of being with something that's like really old, but has a real like empowering feeling and has the ability to bring people together in a really interesting way. And also as an individual, I just felt kind of lifted because I feel lifted by singing. So it's just very great that you bring up that example because I feel Butoh also has a strong moment. I mean, right now, perhaps some of the reason is because it was started at the end of World War II, but Hijikata was very much in revolution mode. I mean, the people of Japan were protesting their government for the first time in Japan's history. And so he was very much part of that protest feeling. They were directly taking from American culture saying, oh, these people protest when they don't like something their government's doing. And they were just, how are we going to do that? And like really trying to embrace those ways. And so, yeah, kind of going against being very counterculture, very strong voiced, very of the people and of the poorest, the people that didn't have. And that's where I feel Butoh very much fits in the community now. We're in a moment. We are, and the theme actually of the festival this year is battles. I mean, I chose the theme at a time when already that I felt that word was being used more and more in describing all kinds of interactions from like the most mundane to like something very big and political, like the word battles was being used. Like I'm battling it out or battling with this. And so how are we going to deal with all that battling, and how are we going to still come together over some things rather than just fight it out and have the winner and have the loser and all that rift and division? How are we going to change it? First, we have to just like expose it and then talk about it, and then maybe expose it some more, talk about it some more until we really can get beyond the idea that we need to just keep conflicting, keep inserting our opinions over listening to others, and when are we going to start really listening to each other? I feel Butoh offers that kind of space and environment for all those things to take place.
And now, in addition to the performance schedule for the festival, you also bring in these artists to facilitate different workshops.
Yeah, there's 3 artists who are going to be doing workshops. The first one is Mari Asonai, and she's from Japan, and she is very trained in what's called Noguchi gymnastics. And Noguchi gymnastics is a lot of the foundation work when you're warming up and first working with the body in Butoh. And it's the idea of the water body. So rather than like an exoskeleton, or you think about muscles and bones, you think about the body as like a bag of water, and you're moving it around with that kind of weight and that kind of gravity and that kind of fluidity as well, like the wave and the ripple. And I think that also could be really good for all kinds of dancers, not just Butoh dancers. The second artist is Paul Michael Henry, and he's coming from Glasgow, Scotland. He's a wild Butoh performance artist, really comes from like the Fringe Festival scene in Glasgow, which is huge. And he's one of the founders of a festival called the Unfixed Festival. And then the third teacher is Ken Mai, and he's from Helsinki, Finland. And he uses voice, he uses Noguchi gymnastics. He's quite theatrical. So he has kind of a more theater side, or brings a lot of like drama, lighting, costume, those kinds of things like are very strong in his aesthetic. So they're 3 quite distinct different artists.
And we talked about your experience as a performer and the experience that an audience member might have in terms of seeing what feelings and emotions it brings up for you, or what questions it brings up. And I think in our previous conversation, you talked about asking the question about, are you ready and willing to accept your whole self, both the light and the shadow? How does that translate for someone who is experiencing Butoh as a participant? Like if you were to take a workshop, how does that play into this inquiry into the self?
It really is individual where someone's at. I definitely see in my own weekly classes how over time people are literally transformed. Whole parts of their lives are different because of like this new way they can approach themselves and their bodies through the training. Especially in these intensive, what I've experienced is when I have multiple days of this kind of inquiry through the physical body, something really deep happens. And sometimes it takes a while to realize what's happened, or some things, can come up right away. Like, I don't know if you've ever been in a yoga class and then suddenly, you're crying because you're in this position and you don't really know why you're crying, or this happens, right? Sometimes these emotional residue, it lives in our body and we move it in a certain way, or we kind of agitate it in a certain way, or even give it too much love that it's not used to getting, then things can kind of change. And because it's happening on more of a subconscious level, we kind of shut off that conscious mind, like the one that's more the editor or the critic, and we kind of let the creative mind flow. So if you are not an artist and coming into this work, which is totally recommended also, like when these people come, if you have a curiosity, like no level of dance training is really necessary to do this work. It's like if you're just curious and are willing to do what they suggest and try, then anybody can really do the work. But it is more about how far you can go. Also, every day is different. So some days you're going to have deep inquiries, and other days you're just going to barely wake up.
And so for you personally, where we left off last time, you were going to be participating in 2 things, the Regional Dance Development Initiative and the Chicago Dance Makers Forum as a lab artist. And I'm just wondering how they turned out.
They were great, actually. The RDDI, the Regional Dance Development Initiative, there was 12 dance artists that were invited to go down to Champaign-Urbana for a 10-day, I guess we decided to call, it was okay to say retreat, although it was quite work heavy, but we were all there, taken away from like our busy lives in Chicago and kind of put together to show each other work, to talk about work, to practice presenting to each other, to practice presenting to presenters, people that present artists from all over the country. So that was quite an experience. Taught me a lot and also gave us a bigger sense of community, which we hope to. And that NEFA, the New England Foundation for the Arts, they support it, and also Chicago Dance Makers Forum. I think both with the intention and the hope that we will then kind of hold that space even more in our community. So we'll come back after kind of feeling, and I think we did, we really felt close to each other. It was a really positive experience for us. And it had all kinds of, emotional content, but also just hard work and kind of acknowledging how much work we all do for the community. And also just to be an artist in the city is not an easy thing. So just even to share those things. So that was a really amazing experience. And actually in the fall of this year now, there will be a performance of many of our works called Elevate, but that'll be in October. But also the CDF project is still in development, although I did do an expanded cinema performance of it in October of 2016, which was 2 nights, and it was really great. The film itself is still in editing process. So that's been really amazing and so much work, so much work and a long process. But at first we were concerned about that long process, but if I understand the film world correctly, like, you work on it as long as you need to, and then the film comes out. So I've let go of a lot of kind of internal and external deadlines to let it have its life the way it needs to. So, yeah.
What has been your biggest growing edge, do you think, over the past year?
I can definitely say very clearly of all the things, communication is, the number one. When you're working on a film project or curating a festival or, working in that setting I told you about with these other dancers, communication is so difficult between us. Like we have to really try. We have to really listen and not make assumptions about where people came from or how they got to where they are, or that we even know where they are in their process or in their life. So for me, communication has been always a fragile place. And I love collaborating with people, even in the film when there was so many people in the room and I kind of was losing it in terms of like, I can't really take control of all these people. I don't know how, I don't know how to lead when there's 20 people looking for my direction. How do I be all the things that I want to be, which is, inspirational. And I also want to be pushing you to be your best, and I want to be accepting and I want to be compassionate and understanding when you're not feeling well or when you have anxiety around this. So how do you negotiate all the things that each human being is? I think that's my lifelong learning and probably interest and challenge too. But I accept that challenge. And I love, when I learn new things, like when I'm wrong, I actually learn a lot. I have been wrong and I just keep reconfiguring or kind of adjusting to those moments where I am, or I celebrate the moments where something actually gets accomplished, where there was a lot of people involved. I can kind of not take that for granted. I can be like, wow, what an amazing thing. Like all these people got together and actually made something. And yeah, it's quite something.
We are in a moment. How are we going to deal with all that battling? First, we have to expose it and then talk about it. I got chills when Sara was describing the relevancy of Butoh and the role of art in our current moment. And I don't know about you, but I'm inspired to check out the workshops and performances for the Post-Butoh Festival Battles scheduled through the month of April from the 5th through the 29th. You can learn more, of course, at butochicago.com, and I will link it up in the show notes at thecreativeimposter.com/030. The official festival statement is as follows. Battles aims to transform our collective fear and the need to fight through concepts of competition, war, and victory. We bring together diverse audiences and performers to fight for light. Dance is an art form which uplifts the spirit, for it gives us an ability to express ourselves as individuals without language and reflect together in fleeting moments of personal victory. We can lift one another up with playful, cutting competition instead of taking everything personally and as an affront. To play is to experiment and experience ourselves as whole humans. This is our humanity after all. Hey, have you ever thought about creating your own podcast? Or maybe you have a business, service, product, book, music, or really any other creative venture for which you'd like to grow your audience. Well, I'm creating a resource for you. It's called Podcast Envy, and right now you can get a free audio download and worksheet called 5 Ways to Expand Your Reach with Podcasting. And while, yes, of course, one of those ways is to host your own show, there are 4 other ways that maybe you haven't even thought of yet. Link is in the show notes and at podcastenvy.com. Also, please remember to take a peek at my Patreon page and see if any of the patron rewards speak to you. Patreon is kind of like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, except that it's geared toward ongoing support for artists who are creating things that really make a difference in your life on an ongoing basis. There are a lot of ways that you can become a part of the community and get even more support for those moments when the creative imposter pops up in your mind and you really just need a boost of confidence to get you through. Again, that's patreon.com/Andrea Klunder. You can also become a part of the community by sending me your favorite creative imposter story from your life so I can get you on an upcoming episode. And get your free trial of audible.com and let me know what your first free book is in the Creative Imposter Facebook group. Whew, as if that wasn't enough to do, go listen to more podcasts. March is #TryPod month, like try a podcast, and I'm recommending Rome Howl with Jennifer Gardner. In full disclosure, Jennifer is my Podcast Envy client. We worked together to launch her show, and Edwin and I edit her episodes, and I love Rome Howl. Jennifer interviews out-of-the-box creative business owners who debunk the theory that creativity is only reserved for certain professions and prove that you can make money from your art. Rome Howl is on iTunes, Google Play Music, and Stitcher Radio, and, of course, at romehowl.com. This episode was mixed by Edwin Ruiz of Mondo Machine. Our theme music is by Jovia Armstrong. Deep gratitude to you for listening, and I wish you a week filled with light.